little bit about myself. Like I have been hearing you the whole day and kind of pieces of each one of the presentations are falling into some kind of a framework that I have, and I'm an outsider here. I teach finance. I'm in the business school, and I have very safely taken the nonprofit as my research interest post-tenure. It won't work if you were seeking tenure and say, I am getting off the grid. You can't. So, and what's the reason for that? The reason for that is that there are a lot of, you can say, tools and information chunks available. And simply because we don't seem to be talking to each other. We are not kind of, the whole idea behind structuring knowledge was that an outsider could come in and look at it and say, what are the tools I can use from here to benefit what I do? And that doesn't seem to be happening. And with that perspective, I started looking at this, and although it says conceptualization, but I believe there are several operational elements here which can improve and standardize the practice. And I will start with the very useful distinction kind of has been allowing me to put all the individual presentations into perspective, is the distinction you drew between agents of service and agents of donors. I would kind of drop the word donor and say agents of financiers, because it's not about donation alone that we are talking about. That's one source of financing. So if you look at what's that? Yeah. Is it? Oh, sorry. This is the JP Morgan survey of impact investments, 2013. It has been going on for about, I think, since 1995, and the figures are not very encouraging. There doesn't seem to be any interest in this sector. So we talk about it a lot. It's a niche activity, and it perpetuates the myth that something is being done. But at the same time, not much is happening in this field. And when I was talking to the Vice President JP Morgan, she was in charge of the social finance area, and she says, we have a perception or a cultural problem here, because when you go and talk to the senior executives in the organization, they think it's, pardon my expression, it's the Christian thing to do. You talk about it around Christmas, make some donations from the organizations, and that's the end of your responsibility and involvement as a finance organization. So why is this happening? Why is it that financial markets are not interested in introducing financial innovation? Because remember, financial markets exist because they connect users of funds with suppliers of funds. And they do that in an intertemporal sense. But they are not interested in going there. There is a lot of volatility in the market today. Markets go up, which according to finance should not be happening even in thousands of years. That is the level of volatility we have in the market today. Anybody ask the question why? And I have heard this thing being very loosely kind of is used very often. There is a scarcity of funds. There are lack of funds. Their demand is growing up. Actually, there is an oversupply of investment funds. There is not enough in the investment opportunity set to invest in, and that is why you have the volatility. I remember in my intro finance class talking about this when I was looking at the Forbes table of external borrowers, and out of the 25 countries, 24 were OECD countries, the top borrowers. Why is it that the markets were willing to give to the Greeks to buy the Porsches, or to the US mortgage holder without any income, without any assets? Has anybody gone into the story behind it? Do you think the market suddenly, the financial markets lost their prudence? You have these Nina loans where you are not supposed to give your salary stub, where you are not supposed to show your assets, and you got a 400,000 loan to buy a house. So the reason is there is just too much money, but not enough financial innovation. And we have to address that question from that perspective. So the first question that comes to my mind here is, and this is broadly what I had thought of in terms of my agenda, is what do we know about the social economy? Okay. Now, social economy is a term which is a very Canadian francophone term, and I'm told it has certain French connotations, but I deliberately use it because I think unless we move away from this whole notion of profits and non-profits, we cannot appreciate the value that is created by this sector and which is central to the overall functioning of the society and the economy. I live in Windsor. My reference point to Canadians is we are next to Detroit. And the reference points to the North American and rest of North America is we are just across the river from Detroit. We are part of the same Rust Belt. We have 15% unemployment. Not one homicide till this year for the last 3 years. Or 4 years, in fact. Now, if you put that position, before the exchange rate almost got equalized, we had 10,000 bar places in downtown Windsor. Folks from across the border for drinking age reasons, for driving or whatever, used to come over. We had a thriving downtown culture. The municipality of Windsor wants to raise taxes to spruce up the downtown area. The Small Business Association complains. No, you can't do that. You'll be driving out business. But here is the conversation that should take place. That by providing those services, by providing those social services, the value of those small businesses is being enhanced. There is a value-added proposition here, not a distributive proposition. So from that perspective, if social economy or the social goods or the non-profit sector is adding value, why are we not in a position to compute it, tabulate it, and put it across the table to the funders? Or even for that matter, do we have to see it as a distinction between internal metrics and metrics for service providers, and metrics for funders? In fact, the metrics for service providers will develop more consistently if we have an external reporting obligation which is standardized. So I'm kind of using a lot of analogy from the financial world because we have a lot of metrics there. But when I look at the methodology there is nothing which suggests that it can't be applied to the not-for-profit sector. The financial world operates on a lot of soft information, a lot of soft data. There is no such thing as objective prices. There is no such thing as objective data. There is no such thing as hard data. We make a lot of assumptions when we are tabulating the information. Why can't those practices be used in the context of the not-for-profit sector? Okay, so I've already talked to you about what do financial markets do. They connect users of funds. Why are they not doing it? What is the, pardon my errors here because I was kind of preparing this slide as the session was moving along. So there is a lot of, might be a lot of typographical errors there. Okay. This is the traditional view that is taken, that if you have impact, you are sacrificing return. And that is the mythology that is the what we call it, a belief system that has to be kind of evaluated. It's very important that we do that. So, why is it that the social economy or the not-for-profit sector is never considered to be part of the value-added proposition? Because, as Johns Hopkins Comparative National Non-Profit Sector Project very clearly points out, it's the invisible subcontinent. This is how the treatment of non-profit sector takes place in the system of national accounts. Much of what is done is allocated to other sectors. So whatever values that are reported are under-reporting. And the second thing is that they are reported on an expenditure basis. So cost of those programs is equal to output of those programs. And you can see that there's a lot of problem in terms of that approach if you want to think of innovation in the nonprofit sector. Because if you're saving costs, you are reducing the size of the nonprofit sector. So the value of the nonprofit sector is in terms of the expenditure or the costs that take place. Now, that is based on the system of national accounts that we have, which is followed by, and same thing about volunteer hours, is the input versus output convention that is being used. Okay, so what are the implications? This is a deficit reduction organization. That is the typical financial management approach to nonprofits. You have a mission, you go around, find how much money you have, and based on that, let's try to, match the mission to the resources we have. So these are some of the kind of reverse causality that occurs when you have a nonprofit sector which does not view itself as part of the value-added proposition in the economy. And that's the belief system that leads to those kind of incorrect approaches. Okay. So how can we introduce valuation in the social economy? Now here, we are talking about donors, financiers. But I don't see them reporting to them as separate from the kind of metrics or impact measurement that we have been talking about within sector. Because the consistency can only come if those practices are validated with external agencies. Now, the key here is that you have to look at this whole notion of value. And what are prices? Prices are a subset of values. In fact, prices as they stand today are based on the notion that prices in exchange, the exchange price is equal to the value of the commodity. That's a simplification which was introduced because we could not resolve the value conundrum. How to find out what is the value of a commodity without saying, okay, supply and demand, whatever you are willing to pay, let's accept that as the value of the commodity. But has value been a stable entity through history? And the answer is no. It depends upon what they call your prevailing ethos, the existing structures in the society. And there are a lot of examples whereby there have been dramatic reversals in the understanding of value. So if you look at some of these episodes in economic history, the physiocrats, for example, they were a bunch of doctors in the French court. They were the first one to compile the system of national accounts. And what did they end up saying? Based on the empirical evidence of river valley civilizations, their submission was that the only source of value is agriculture. Everything else is a function of the surplus created in agriculture. They had empirical evidence on their side. But when you find the mercantilist era coming along, you have Ricardo giving a theory of rent where he says landlords are parasites. So the whole value proposition was reversed on its head by the historical requirement. And today, we are at that point in history. You see, it is for nothing that a protest about a park, whether you should have a park or not, flares up into a national protest against the government. That kind of latent tension is there in a lot of societies. And to say that we can continue with as business as usual will be ignoring, at least us as academics, will be ignoring the real questions of the day. And that is where we need to go back and look at this whole value question. What is value? Are we comfortable with what has been handed down to us as exchange price being equal to value? I'll give you an example of this. This is Adam Smith in his assessment of education. Do we agree with that? Do we look at education today as a source of order, decency alone? Or we consider, because every time from the pulpits, the president of this country or every other country is saying, education is key to our future. But this is where we were at some point. So the question is, value has to be available, has to be put on the table for debate, especially given where we are in terms of, democratization, in terms of rising expectations of the average population, connectivity, the new information age. You can no longer say that we can do business as usual based on exchange value being equal to price. That is a fundamental challenge. Now, how do we translate that into prices? Now, here is something which we need to be, a little bit, parsimonious in terms of drawing from what we know, so that we don't go out and come up with a whole set of techniques which are individually structured by each organization, by each consultant, by each practitioner, by each researcher. In Canada, we recently had an assessment of social impact measurement, and it has come out with a report. 160 different methods of social impact measurement are in practice or have been proposed. And if you look at the literature that has been used to compile those measures, the same goes with SROI. SROI 1 failed because the San Francisco organization found that it took up too much time and it was very inconsistent in application. So you find that there is a plethora of versions of social impact is being used. We need to be a little bit careful in terms of relating it to the existing discipline. And here, there are three things that I have found which are of relevance here in terms of the discussion. Environmental sciences have been looking at non-market values for a fairly long time, and they have come up with standardized set of techniques for measuring non-market value. And the one that they seem to be more comfortable with is what they call this, what has been called in economics, the stated preference technique. This is used by courts. This is used by environmental management. This is used by the Department of Ocean and Environment Management. I'm forgetting the acronym. But it is a well-received practice. It is understood by all. We don't need to go and look at some other techniques to try to assess social value. Social value, which is a non-market value conceptually, and it can be measured based on an existing body of literature. We don't have to come and invent each one our own individual method. Reporting requirements go up, staff time goes up, you have different grantees are requiring different kinds of metrics. We don't need that. The second thing is regarding soft data. Tools like Monte Carlo simulation allow you to take a range of perspectives of information and convert them into quantitative information. So simulation, something which financial markets do very often, because you see, it's all about the future. Nobody knows what it will be. So to take precise values of information and come up with projections about value or returns or impact is methodologically flawed. What we need to do is we need to take some of these tools and make it part of our decision structure, that we can take a range of values based on qualitative assessment. So if somebody is saying that a program has a benefit of X amount of dollars, this could be, X amount could be 5 to 50. And we are comfortable with that, using the 5 to 50 range to come up with a projection of value based on that simulation. So there are tools available which can allow for the conversion of soft information into, hard, concrete results which are more logically amenable to the probabilistic nature of the future. The future is probable. It has not happened yet. So we should have techniques to match that, and these techniques are available. The third thing is that when we look at, for example, Noah's thing about setting up a venture market, you see, there is already a substantial body of literature which looks at the setting up of the credit derivative market. And a lot of important insights are there. Credit derivatives are an example of a market where there are no underlying priced assets. It is all opinion. It is all based on the assessment of risk. But there is no underlying asset whose prices we are tracking. And the studies in organizational behavior are showing that you need a whole process by which you can set up such markets, like markets of weather derivatives, markets in credit derivatives, markets on terrorism insurance products. These are markets which are set up based on an iterative process where you introduce calculability, you introduce government's role, like the Scottish government trying to move people, nudge people forward to that frame of thinking, that you have to adopt metrics. Here are these external agencies. We will support you by funding it. That is the message I got from your presentation. Like I was trying to put it in that context. So you have calculability and you have a whole conversation take place. The reason why the credit derivative market happened was the Investment Dealers Association lobbied hard and managed to get a court opinion which says that no, derivatives are a financial product. So similarly, in the nonprofit schools, in the nonprofit forums, there is a need for a conversation about the value proposition and how that value proposition has to be structured, rather than merely viewing it as some kind of a distributive, donor-based activity, which we kind of engage in. Because fundamentally, this is as much a value-adding activity as the market, or for that matter, the government. And in that context, if you are setting up the whole equation, metrics is not a problem. Metrics tools exist, and they can be, but at this point, what we find is that seems to be an attempt to develop metrics, but basically we are getting into this kind of a situation where we are saying we will throw everything into the mix and we will come up with something to, which some value, and somehow try to sell it forward. We need some kind of an organized approach, and frankly speaking, we don't need to reinvent the wheel. It exists. And all we need is a wider body of conversation from outside our silos to be able to bring that knowledge together. I think that's, am I on time?
Yes, and
Great.
few minutes for questions.
Thank you. Thanks.
I'll take a chance.
Yeah.
Can I have a real microphone?
Oh, sorry. Comes pretty well strapped.
Even though we have a nonprofit unit here in a business school, there are very few business schools that have gone this route. So I welcome the discussion of the soft economy, the social economy, and the warning that if you focus too much on nonprofit, you're not part of the dominant culture. I think that's some of the things I heard you say.
Yes.
One of the things I'd like both you and Sal to comment on, and I'll go back into that history that you brought up, the issue of from agriculture on to the mercantile on to technology. The Industrial Revolution seemingly began when the basis of wealth shifted from land to capital. Capital was mobile, therefore work was separated from the family, and the social impact had a whole stream of things. Specialization, deferral of marriage because of the need to have education, eventually universal education. To me, those were social impacts. In Sal's presentation, he gave us a strong advocacy for program evaluation. I am looking for our researchers going from program evaluation, looking for those social impacts, which I think are the area that would break us out. I just think this is an ironic thing. I was over in China, and we're bringing some Chinese students over. They legalized nonprofits in '04. But unlike most internationals, they don't like to say non-governmental. So originally we're calling them GNGOs, governmental, non-governmental. Now they're using the American term nonprofit because it's more comfortable for them. Ironically, here we are a capitalist society using nonprofit, which is like shooting ourselves in the foot. That's why I like community benefit. But I think that issue you raise in a very interesting global context. Here at Notre Dame, we stress the United Nations global context for corporations becoming softer, and yet rarely do we look at nonprofits taking a chance on pushing harder to say we're part of the same economy. So I really thank you for that insight. And I'd like you to comment on the social impact, because I didn't hear much in Sal's presentation, and I didn't hear you take it to the next step on how we deal with embracing the soft economy without compromise.
You see,
Here.
yeah, sorry. Thank you. So essentially, in terms of how to operationalize the social impact metrics, in terms of being able to measure that, and in a consistent manner, so that we are able to generate a larger conversation here. Now, part of that is the system of national accounts, which is being revisited, and the 2008 has had some kind of a reclassification and based on value added. In fact, I have something here which says that, if I recall correctly, oh, sorry, I'm going the wrong way. Value-added. 2008 what they call the direct volume measurement. So it will require prices of non-traded goods. And if you look at the Paul Fiduci and Stiglitz Commission on System of National Accounts, which the French government, incidentally, wants to be used. It was instituted under Sarkozy, and I don't see them going back on that, where they are saying GDP measures have to be adjusted to reflect the social impact of economic activities. And that is how we should start measuring our system of national accounts. So that is one level of argument. The other is that in terms of there is already a received body of understanding that, you see, like if you look at the Detroit River, the Michigan government issued what are called industrial site, refurbishment, or I'm not forgetting the exact name, but $10 billion have been raised from public money to claim back industrial sites which have been left after those industries have left and gone and disappeared. Now, today, it is not possible to do the same level of environmental damage as was done earlier. So today, the industries have to account for that in their cost metrics. If they are going to they are not allowed, they are supposed to treat the environmental products in a certain way, their effluents in a certain manner. It was not done earlier. So to a certain extent, it would be interesting to see what would be the cost of, reclaiming those industrial sites. Only 200 out of 3,200 sites have been claimed back. And adjust the profits of all the companies going back in time and saying this was actually the true level of profits and not the profits that you claim in your account books. So the same kind of metrics approach has to be adapted to the social sector. So if you look at the Perry School's high scope study, they have gone back 40 years, and what have they come up? That every dollar that they spend on early school education, it has led to $17 of benefits computed in terms of reduction in prison time, in social welfare expenditure, family stability, the future earnings of the children. All these things have been computed. So there is an attempt to do that, and we have to, first of all, agree that it is not about redistribution. This is about the value offered, because if the Windsor restaurants are able to operate, they are able to operate in a certain socio-economic environment. And that is why businesses in Detroit are not able to operate. And that is a tangible benefit that comes from the existence of the social goods and the social services. And that connection has to be reiterated and established.
I just have Sal respond.
Okay, yeah, please.
Yeah, no, I can use this one.
Okay.
Why don't you, Sal, if you use that one just.
Okay.
No, this one is stories?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll use this one then. Yeah, I'll address why I kind of didn't explicitly connect the dots between program evaluation and social impact. I'll say that for last, but I would say to really get at social impact in the United States, we have to do a couple of things. First of all, I think we need to start engaging more research into root cause analysis. So I think our federal government and I think the nonprofits themselves together have been successful at framing the nonprofit sector as service providers. They provide a service which is more treatment oriented than it is engaging in root cause analysis. So instead of just feeding the hungry, why don't we start asking why we have hungry people here? Instead of just housing the homeless, why don't we start asking why we have the homeless and what if anything, can we do about that? Secondly, I think the federal government needs to start looking at the nonprofit sector as a more nimble and agile agent for incorporating entrepreneurship and trying to find some creative solutions to problems and providing financial incentives to ramp up to scale that activity to try to solve problems. Lastly, I would say, funders constantly pound on the nonprofits to collaborate. And when I have a funder in the room, I always ask them, well, who are you collaborating with? So here in South Bend, if we have a government agency, we have a family foundation, maybe a corporation, maybe Notre Dame itself, and everybody's interested in solving childhood obesity. Why don't we see more collaboration of entities that hold the resources? Isn't it more logical for those who hold the resources to collaborate and pull them together than those who need them? So why don't we see more collaboration for common desires and common problems? The connection to program evaluation for me is I don't think you can entirely remove it out of the equation. Because if we're going to measure social impact at a community level or at a societal level, when you strip that down, really what we're talking about is changing the lives of a group of individuals, however many those individuals are. And I still think program evaluation is going to have a role in that process.
I don't disagree. I'm trying to find the link. And that's where I think research has to really start addressing.
Oh, I agree with you completely. I don't think we're there yet. I think we got plenty of work to do to get to that point. I know some of the dialogue on collective impact is kind of nudging us in that direction, but it's going to require cooperative learning and cooperative work. And when people have political agendas and territorial issues, that gets a little messy. But I think it's going to take intersectoral cooperation to solve the complex problems of our society that have been around for hundreds of years. And I don't mean to oversimplify it, but I'm just using simple logic.
Just to add to that, one thing that comes up repeatedly, there are two aspects of this. One is that, universities, largely, at least in Canada, they are all publicly funded institutions. Increasingly now, our research funders and all are saying, demonstrate to us, in the social science research funding part, what is your impact on the community? And one of the ways to do that is, particularly in business school context, to collaborate with nonprofits in helping them. You see, not everybody can afford that kind of a program evaluation. But universities, students, in partnership with the, say, in the finance faculty or the nonprofit faculty, can do those kind of program evaluations and develop some kind of a consistent methodology, which is already there. As I said, the contingent valuation method in the environmental science literature is a received and standardized product, fairly structured and detailed, used as evidence also in courts as an indication of value. So those kind of techniques should be used to develop some consistency in program evaluation and in terms of reporting metrics. And if we develop that culture over time, it is something that, as in the for-profit world, if you look at it, reporting is only a post-Second World War phenomenon. After the Great Depression, it was no longer enough. Prior to that, I am told that the United States had about 30 or 50 different series of data that was reported. There was no system of national accounts, there was no system of consistent corporate reporting. So it is not that the for-profit sector has had this since, for hundreds of years or way back whenever they started operating. It is a very recent, and it's still being structured, because if you look at the reporting, we are still facing challenges now given the globalization environment, but most of the companies are able to get past those reporting requirements and not able to report any profits or any need for paying taxes. So it is still an ongoing process going on, and I think what happens is, what the feeling I get in the nonprofit sector is that we are too apologetic. That is, there is a note of, we are dealing with intangibles. We are not dealing with measurables. But if you look at the cost of capital measurement methodology in finance, which is taught to the intermediate finance students, after I run through them exercise, they say, this could be any number you assume. And that is exactly so. But it doesn't mean that the practice is stopped. The practice is done or is standardized, and every company's cost of capital can be computed, but we know what the problems are and why we can't take it at face value and what more we need to know. But the same, at this point, is not even attempted in the nonprofit sector.
Got us ready for that glass of wine.